The year is 1997. One of the most recognizable companies in the world is 3 months from running out of money. Not struggling, not posting bad quarters. 3 months from the lights going out. And almost no one on the outside knows. Apple Computer had been in slow motion collapse for the better part of a decade. The company that had launched the Macintosh on national television, that had once promised to put a dent in the universe, it was now a punchline. Fortune magazine put it plainly: Apple was the Silicon Valley paragon of dysfunctional management and fumbled techno dreams. Sales had dropped 30% in the final quarter of 1996 alone. The board had cycled through CEOs. Products had multiplied into a confusing fog, over 40 SKUs that no one, not even Apple's own salespeople, could explain. And sitting in the corner, while all of this happened, was an operating system that hadn't been updated in years. A system so outdated it couldn't compete with Microsoft Windows. A system the company had tried, and failed, to replace internally for nearly 5 years. Apple needed a new OS. And it couldn't build one. So in December 1996, CEO Gil Amelio made a decision that felt strange at the time, and looks like fate in hindsight. Apple bought a small computer company called Next for $429 million. Next had maybe 300 employees. Its annual revenue was around $50 million, and it was losing money on that. But Next had 2 things Apple desperately needed: a Unix-based operating system that could become the foundation of a new Mac OS. And the man who built it. Steve Jobs had been gone from Apple for 12 years. Pushed out in 1985 by the board he helped build, humiliated in a power struggle with the CEO he'd hired. He'd spent the years since building Next and then Pixar, where he'd just made history with Toy Story. He was a billionaire. He was, by any measure, fine. But Apple, the company he'd co-founded in a garage, the company he'd always described as his life's work, Apple was dying. The acquisition made him an advisor. In theory, he reported to Amelio. In practice, it didn't last long. By the summer of 1997, Apple's stock had hit a 12-year low. Amelio's tenure had produced Apple's worst ever financial quarter. The board had seen enough. Over the 4th of July weekend, Jobs convinced the board that Amelio had to go. Amelio submitted his resignation. Jobs became interim CEO on the 16th of September, 1997. He would joke that the title was the iCEO, making it, technically, Apple's first iProduct. What he didn't joke about was the situation he'd walked into. Here's how Jobs later described it: Apple had been 90 days from being insolvent. 90 days of cash, that's it. He didn't have the luxury of a long plan. He didn't have time for committees or pilot programs or 18-month roadmaps. His first move was brutal and simple. He walked into Apple and looked at what the company sold. Over 40 product variations. Printers, scanners. A handheld device called the Newton. Servers, digital cameras, accessories. A licensing program that let other manufacturers clone the Mac, and undercut Apple's own machines in the process. Jobs' reported reaction: we were selling a lot of crap. He cut it down to 4 products. A desktop and a laptop, for consumers and professionals. 2x2. Anything that didn't fit got cancelled. 70% of Apple's inventory was cut. Entire divisions were shut. The Newton, a product he effectively killed at announcement just by mocking it publicly, was scrapped. The clone program was ended. It was not surgical. It was a fire. But slashing products doesn't pay the bills. And the bills were very real. Jobs needed cash, and he needed it fast. So he did something that shocked even people who knew him well. He called Bill Gates. Apple and Microsoft had been rivals for over a decade. There was a bitter lawsuit over the Mac's visual interface. Apple claimed Microsoft had stolen the look of the desktop for Windows. The legal fight had dragged on for years and gone nowhere. Beyond the lawsuit, the rivalry was personal. Jobs had never been quiet about what he thought of Microsoft's approach to software, to design, to practically everything. And yet, on the 6th of August, 1997, at the Macworld Expo in Boston, Jobs walked onto the stage and announced a deal with Microsoft. Microsoft would invest $150 million in Apple, purchasing non-voting shares. Microsoft would commit to shipping Office for Mac for at least 5 more years. The two companies would settle their patent dispute with a broad cross-licensing agreement. To announce the deal, Jobs had arranged for Gates to appear live via satellite on the large screen behind him. The audience booed. Jobs later called the staging his worst and stupidest mistake. But the money was real. The deal was real. And Apple, for the first time in years, had breathing room. What happened next is the part of this story that gets compressed into montage, a sequence of iconic product launches strung together as if they were inevitable. They were not inevitable. Jobs understood something the previous management hadn't. Apple wasn't a computer company that needed better computers. Apple was a design company that happened to make computers, and it had forgotten that. In 1998, Apple introduced the iMac. A translucent blue and white all-in-one that looked like nothing else on the market. In its first year, Apple sold 800,000 of them. The company turned a profit of $309 million that same fiscal year, after losing over $1 billion the year before. The iMac was only the beginning. In 2001, the iPod. In 2003, the iTunes Store. In 2007, the iPhone. Each product built on the last. Each one created a category that hadn't clearly existed before. By the time Apple crossed $1 trillion in market capitalization in 2018, the 90 days from insolvent story had become mythology. A founding parable for the comeback playbook. But there's a detail in this story that's easy to skip over. Jobs didn't come back to Apple with a plan. He came back with a diagnosis. He saw a company that had confused activity with progress, that had shipped 40 products thinking more products meant more market, and had discovered the opposite. He saw a company that had lost its identity so completely it couldn't remember what made it worth saving. The cuts he made weren't a strategy. They were the removal of everything that was blocking the strategy. And the deal with Microsoft, the hated enemy, the rival, the company that had supposedly stolen from Apple, that deal was not surrender. It was a surgeon using the best tool available, regardless of where it came from. Jobs said it at Macworld, "We have to let go of a few notions here. The notion that your enemy can't save you. The notion that simplicity is giving up. The notion that a company with 90 days of cash is already finished." Apple had 90 days of cash in 1997. Today it is one of the most valuable companies in the history of the world. The distance between those two facts is not genius. It is not luck. It is a sequence of hard, specific decisions made by a person who understood what the company actually was, and refused to let it become something else. That's the master of business anecdotes.